much more of sort of that, sort of systematic, like step-by-step process. I want to kind of step away from that and have them experience that sort of the messiness of science, and then ultimately kind of being able to figure some of that out. So I've sort of struggled with how to find a replacement for that. But then in my ocean science class, in theory, they're supposed to go collect data and be able to actually like get some data from the Salish Sea and be able to do a research project, and they're not going to be able to do that. So yes, there's sort of data that they can access that's online that they can then look at, sort of the NANUS and access stuff from there. But again, not quite the same experience. So I'm sort of struggling with those things. One thing, I have a colleague who created sort of virtual field trips that are really low sophistication in terms of really relatively easy to make, that basically if you have photos from multiple shots and you have like pictures of close up of a rock or something, then you can kind of walk students through using PowerPoint or PDF to be able to actually kind of go through and like make some sort of observations and interpretations that I might do as something, but it's not quite the same.
Gotcha. Thank you so much for very eloquently and articulately kind of summarizing a core problem of practice around field trips. I really appreciate that. And I see that folks are starting to type into the chat about some maybe some solutions to field trips. And so I'm wondering if folks could start to share what are, or Lucas, maybe I think you're monitoring the chat. What are you seeing in the chat that's showing up as some solutions?
It looks like, and I posted the link, Arizona State has a really good website, and I've never used it, but I'm basing off other people's chat here, and I pulled it up. It has a great virtual field trip site where they do, and I don't know what those consist of, but they have a kind of lessons embedded in them. And then it looks like, who posted that? Catherine posted that it looks like some national parks and monuments are also running virtual field trips, and you can actually speak with a park staff member. So there's a variety of those things going on across the country. You have zoos and museums also running a lot of virtual talks and doing things like that I think are good replacements. So it looks like there's some really good ideas. I think that once we get to the point where we start talking about sharing, I think there's a lot of people that have some good ideas here in the chat. It'd be great if someone wants to speak to maybe the Arizona State site or some of these national park trips so we can hear more about them.
And if I could use my facilitator privilege to say, Catherine Hoppy, I'm dying to hear about the virtual field trips and the one-to-one chat with the park staff. Would you be willing to just share some insights about that?
I'm dying to know how it works too.
We're all dying to know.
No, I'm literally emailing back and forth this morning with Dinosaur National Monument, and they are running half-hour field trips. You sign up. I don't know how far ahead you can sign up, but I just got the link yesterday. So if it works out, they have an itinerary. Basically, they run through the park. You get students. They prefer small groups so that the students can ask one-on-one questions to the park staff. And I'm keeping my fingers crossed for my dinosaur class. But I bet they're not the only ones doing this.
Thank you so much. That was very helpful. And I'm seeing that, like as Lucas said, other folks have contributed ideas. So if folks don't mind just taking the mic and just speaking to whatever resource it is you posted in the chat, for those who are watching the recording later, I think that'll be really helpful.
If maybe Michelle Harris would be willing to speak. It looks like there's a really good one about Washington State parks. So I'd love to hear about that. I think that's always really important for engaging our students in the actual environment.
Yeah, so I participated in one. It was a trip to Mount Rainier, and they are just doing it over Zoom, and they're inviting the national the ranger to basically talk and show you around. And I emailed the main person about it and said, this would be really awesome. Can I get the recordings of them? And so she's been super excited about helping out, and she sent me notifications. There's a new one that's up for the Olympics. So there's an Olympics one, there's a Mount Rainier one. And she said they have some other cool ones planned. They're not all geology, but it still at least gets them, to locations where we're all in Washington, right? Where we'd hope we could take them to anyway. So it's a pretty cool resource. I would just check out the website, and I'm just gonna, for my students at least, I'm going to give them that website and say, pick one, go on the field trip, and then, write about what you learned, or, specifics about the rocks, stuff like that.
And Michelle, in the name of, sort of like front loading things, if you would be willing to share that assignment to the Canvas shell, I think that would be really useful for folks.
I haven't made it yet, but I will.
When in the fullness of time.
Ahead of them, so I'm getting there.
Yes, and I think too, a lot of faculty are going to be in that situation, and so again, if everyone posts one thing that they've created, then it's like you get this embarrassment of riches back that you can then don't. So if you invent that one thing, maybe then you'll have other things. Thank you so much. Ralph, I see you have your hand up. Ralph Dawes. Ralph, if you want to unmute yourself, or I can unmute you. Oh, I think I just muted you. Okay.
Yes.
There you go. What would you like to share with us?
Okay, this is Ralph Dawes at Wenatchee Valley College, and I have some circa year 2000 kind of primitive text and pictures, virtual field trips that work for my Pacific Northwest geology class. My challenge is they do a term project where they pick a field site with my help, and they go out on their own and they examine and photograph and observe the geology, and then again with my guidance, interpret what the rocks are, what the structures are, what the geologic formations are, and what its geologic history is. I don't know if they can get outside and do that, and so I am struggling. I might have to pick something that isn't so locally based, but I just wonder if anyone else has any familiarity with that level of has to be particularly local kind of field trip, instead of general ones to state parks and so on.
That's a great idea, but I don't know if these places are open. State parks and national parks. And to be honest, I don't know if they are.
No, they're, for the most part, they're not. I don't know about the national parks. State parks, I believe, are not. So I may have to just punt for this term and not have that. I'm just wondering if there's anything anyone else might know of that might partly fill that in. I could also go out and make my own pictures or videos from local street ends and accessible trails, but I'm not sure if I have the time and resources for that either. So this one may be intractable at this point, but it may be a reminder for me to prepare such materials to create such things in the future if we're still shut down or another epidemic occurs.
Yeah, I think Michelle had something to contribute. Michelle, what were you thinking in response?
I was just kind of going with the same thing Ralph was saying. I have them do like a explore geology project where they go out to a national park or some park and do some research on that region. And I was kind of just thinking about having them just go anywhere and find a rock and see if they can figure out what it is. Because it's like rock and mineral class, so it doesn't have to necessarily be a park, but go find a rock and then let's see if we can investigate and, crack it open with a hammer and do some investigation to see what it is and where it might have come from, just to at least get them out in the field a little bit.
Yeah, but it's basalt out here in Pasco. It's not very interesting.
In my area, almost all of them can find loose rocks swept in by the glacial Lake Missoula giant floods. I compare that to maybe some access to local bedrock. So that's an idea I've had, which sounds similar. So that might work.
Yeah.
Mine are newbies. They don't
with
know
the basalt, I got nothing there. But
Christina, do you want to voice what your problem of practice is? Are we stepping away from field trips and towards rock and mineral identification?
I'm trying to do a blended if possible, but I'm hoping you guys have ideas because this is really my second year teaching intro to geology, and I've got plenty of ideas because I'm a rock hound by nature, and I've been exploring online. The AGU has virtual field trips. I don't know if you guys followed them. The American Geophysical Union. They've been posting that that's available for teachers, and they have 200 field trips. I've looked at some of them. There's a couple of them that would be adequate as maybe an introduction. I'm not sure for rigor. If you were going to explore terrains and look at different terrains and make a comparison, I could see that being useful. It's possible, it's willing to do that, but there's so much that you could develop, and I've got to get something out this year, not in the future. So I'm looking for ideas. As far as mineral ID, I tried the get my students out, and I walked around my neighborhood, took pictures of different landscaping materials, because of course it's basalt here, but there was a little bit of agate. And in my yard, because I'm a rock hound, I have rocks from other locations and other kinds of weathering events. And I do have a few metamorphic rocks at home. I did not bring any of my geology samples home. I haven't been back to Walla Walla since. So I'm making do with what I got at home and hoping for the best. So I'm looking for some ideas for doing rock ID. I don't want to destroy the rocks that I do have to do a mineral test. And I'm wondering if anybody has any ideas, or if they have good photos of some of these tests, maybe for like marble and, you know, just ones that would be applicable, that they could go, oh yeah, this is, you know, structural material that I might test, or I might see, or I might tell somebody how to test.
Thank you,
thoughts.
Christina.
Sorry.
Thank you no, you're doing great. Thank you so much. And so I think we're going to transition into rock and mineral identification. And before we do that, Alice and Voldson says, "Don't knock the basalt. I love basalt." And Alice, do you want to take the mic in defense of basalt?
Oh, I mean, can you hear me? I just want to make sure.
You're doing great. Thank you.
Okay. I'm poking fun a little bit, and I like basalt, and I'm fascinated by the columns, and I teach astronomy, so the basalt is what's all over the moon and all the big maria. And so the fact that we've got basically a maria here in Washington State is fascinating and awesome from my point of view. But I recognize that it's hard to use it to as your sole rock to teach rocks and mineralogy and petrology and stuff. So.
At the same time, thank you for that. That was very beautiful. And the poet in me was very excited about moon on Earth. So one thing that before we get into kind of like specific activities, one thing I do want to ask is, so what are the core outcomes that you're trying to teach to in terms of the different, like in terms of this identifying? And the reason I ask is because I think we all, and Lucas, I feel like you might be able to speak to this better than me. I think we all have things that we love to do with our students that we've cultivated over time, and the students love it and we love it, and it makes us all feel glad to be alive and teachers. But in a pinch, as you're trying to move to the online environment, obviously some things that you do face-to-face just can't be replicated. And so when in doubt, thinking about the outcomes and then designing very simple, low stakes, low tech solutions for students so they can still get the outcomes, I think is important. And Lucas, do you have anything to add to that before we start to think about this a little bit more concretely?
No, I think that's really good. It's about meeting those learning outcomes and figuring out what works. And in this situation, I think the low tech is a great way to go to your best of your abilities. I did want to point out there was a Google Doc shared in the chat on resources that are being put together. I think it was Kachi. I don't know if I said that correctly, so please correct me if I'm wrong, but posted it, and it is amazing. There's already it's a Google sheet, and it's got everything organized by online lectures, online labs and field trips, videos, guest lectures, online resources, and a section on what do I still need resource that is being put together for Geosciences, and it has tons of material. I wanted to point that out because I'm looking at it right now, and some people have already done some great work putting together amazing resources for people.
Lucas, thank you for voicing that. And Katja, if you guys don't mind, if we're just a little nonlinear, Katja, I'm going to call that site up right now and show it on the screen. Do you think you could talk through that since you're the one who shared that resource?
Sure. Yeah, it was Julie LaBarkin shared that, who is a geoscience education research person. And so I think she's the one who's been sort of putting it together, but it's definitely been kind of crowdsourced. And it's one that, I think the idea is that it continues to grow, and it's for all different spectrum of the geosciences across the majors. So there's some stuff that's for, upper division, but there's definitely some stuff I'm planning to pull from there, like virtual field trips. And some, so some of the resources we've been talking about are already in there, although there's definitely some new stuff that's come up as well. And so I think that is, I don't know, it's definitely one that I'm excited to be able to tap into when I'm beyond surviving each week.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And apparently I can't call it up. Lucas, you were able to open it though.
Yeah, make sure you use the second link she posted.
Sorry, the first one I posted was from an email wonkiness, so I reposted.
Ah, I see it. Oh, I see. God, that didn't work well. Okay. Thank you, Katja. So I will call this up. And Lucas, what else are you seeing in the chat that we should move to in terms of maybe rock mineral identification?
Yeah, I think that was probably the next one to look at. I think that, field trips wise, I think we've talked about it, and there's plenty of resources, it looks like. So I think looking at the identification part would be a good conversation for people to have.
I'd like ID.
Yeah, so what are people doing to address this particular learning outcome?
I can speak on that a little bit. I found some pretty awesome websites that are allowing you to identify different minerals using the properties that we teach. I can share that in the box here in a minute, but same with if you guys aren't part of the CERC group, they're sharing a lot of really awesome resources regarding that.
Right, it's accessible right now.
Let's see. Here's the website from me for that. This is mineral identification, but there's igneous and sedimentary and metamorphic as well.
Michelle, thank you so much. It looks like Ralph has something in the chat about this. Ralph, do you want to share what you wrote in the chat?
Well, if you have rocks and minerals, and maybe we don't want to use testing things like glass plates and HCl if our students don't have them. But with my iPhone, I can make really good videos of me getting up, virtually zoom pictures in close of the rock or mineral properties, and just talk out loud how I'm thinking through, making it simple, step by step, how I'm identifying these things and what I'm looking for. And those are useful. And then have students try it in reverse. But then I ran into the problem where I haven't really made that much use of that on the reverse end, having students do it because they don't all have good cameras or smartphones and so on. So that it may be useful for teaching them, getting the reverse for them to turn in something similar back is a different question. I'll mention one other thing. I've got pictures of our lab collection of rock and minerals, and I have those up as just pictures in Canvas, and along with a few clues of some of their properties if you were to test them. And so they work through those, and given the visual appearances, which may show cleavages as well as colors and lusters and minerals and that sort of thing, or crystal shapes, maybe a few other clues like what the hardness would be, they identify with that, and that seemed to work pretty well.
Thank you, Ralph. What else are people doing in terms of this particular activity?
Well, if I can talk, you guys can hear me?
We can.
All right, good. I'm still not totally good on Zoom, but I have about a 3-hour series of 15 videos of a few minutes to maybe 40 minutes each, kind of going through the different mineral properties to prep for the mineral lab. And I have a number of rock boxes at my library, which of course students can't check out, but I've kind of walked through each rock online, kind of, you know, basically giving them the answers, but kind of discussing the different properties of each one of the minerals. And I'm developing a kind of lab where they go through Canvas quizzes and they kind of look at the properties and, you know, basically give them the answers, but, you know, they can kind of make some guesses and stuff like that and have some, you know, scant participation, I guess, into identifying what minerals there are there. I don't know how successful it's going to be, but I've done the talks before for the preps and they've worked out pretty well.
Thank you. Thank you. And would you be willing to share those to the Canvas shell?
Yes, I could. Like I said, I'm still a little bit sketchy on using the Zoom stuff. I've been just mostly focusing on trying to set up the rock stuff. That was my focus. And
we can, yeah, we can definitely show you how to share them just to Canvas. So when we get this dialed in, we can support you in how to share those, and you won't need to do it with Zoom. It'll be much more simple. So I am seeing that there is a question about astronomy that's astronomy specific, and Alice posted it and Katja said she's also struggling with this. So an astronomy challenge, she's struggling to teach seasons in a way without having students stand up in a circle and learn it kinesthetically. And she's got some resources, but they're Flash based, and Flash doesn't work on mobile devices and it's disappearing. So she's looking for non-Flash, non-publisher paywalled interactives and distance learning lesson plans at the college level. And Katja said she's also interested because she needs to teach tides and phases of the moon. And Anthony, you teach astronomy, so do you want to answer this?
Sure. So I have a few labs that I can actually do as online activities, and it kind of depends on which specific topics you want to cover. I have a couple that are ones that were originally in-person labs where they can actually print them off themselves or take the data on their own. And then I have a couple more that they can actually do just at home as simulations. And I've also received a number from, at the American Association of Physics Teachers group chat, there was, his name escapes me at the moment, but my cat is trying to get in the screen right now, but there was a professor from Portland Community College, and he actually got a NASA grant to write up a series of labs for open source materials, and he shared those with us so we could distribute them out. So I have about 15 pretty good astronomy labs. Well, actually it's more like 45. I have 15 for one class, 15 for another, 15 for another. So it's like 45 labs that he's written up for that. So I could share those on a Canvas shell if there's a need for that.
Anthony, I think there definitely will be. And also, I just want to point out, Steve, do you want to, so Steve is one of our colleagues in e-learning. Steve, you have a response about Flash files.
Yeah, I haven't finished this yet, but I was looking into some conversion programs to perhaps take old Flash files and convert them into newer formats. I don't know if that's absolutely foolproof, but I'm kind of working on that, and I don't know who it was that talked about having a bunch of old Flash files. But anyway, I put my email address in there, and if you want to contact me, and then I can follow up. And hopefully, a few days, I'll be able to look at that and see if I can find some software to convert that.
So Steve, thank you for that. And Alice said that she will send you the link. So Alice and Steve, thank you. And then of course, once that's converted, if we can post it to the Canvas shell so other astronomers can benefit, that would be awesome.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, so one thing I'm just looking through the chat here, and John Hellier, I think you were talking in the chat a little bit earlier. Do you want to share a little bit about what resources you're suggesting?
So I got an email, well, a couple of weeks ago. I think she sent it to a bunch of people from somebody at the City College of San Francisco, and she had a number of links, I think some YouTube videos, and to her class on mostly rock and mineral identification.
That would be awesome if we, if, you know, once we get the Canvas shell up and running, which should be within the next 24 hours, if you would be willing to share those links, that would be awesome.
Okay.
Thank you, John. So Alyssa has a suggestion, and Alyssa, do you want to take the mic and share your notion of an internet scavenger hunt for rocks and minerals?
Oh, well, it's in the chat, but yeah, I was just thinking maybe students could look through the internet resources for different pictures of rocks and minerals. I mean, I know it's not the same as identifying it out in the field because a lot of the stuff they'll be able to find is already labeled, but maybe they could take, you know, the process of hunting for some of those things, find an image of it and either put it in a PowerPoint or maybe some sort of a sketchbook that they could then submit online and include, you know, 5 to 10 of the characteristics that identify that particular rock or mineral might be a way to help them learn to identify those items. And then it could maybe become a resource for them later if they were going to continue on in geology and be out in the field identifying things. Just a thought.
Yeah, I think that's great. Thank you.
Hey, Jen.
Go ahead, Lucas.
I just wanted to add there, just to piggyback off Alyssa's idea there. There's a program called ThingLink, which is kind of an odd name, but it would be an interesting way, and I can put it, if we have the Canvas space, in there with some instructions, but it would be an interesting way to have some images of minerals or rock, and you can actually put people in groups, and they can actually basically add little icons to different areas on the image and type their own captions. It'd be a different way of assessing rock and mineral identification, where they're able to actually look at an image and add notes to it, and they can do it in small groups. Sorry you guys are hearing my 9-month-old, but I'll put that in there. But that would be a good tool as well, possibly, that would be somewhat low tech and not involve a bunch of searching if they don't have time, and you could provide an image as an instructor that has multiple things that you want them to identify.
Thank you, Lucas. Thank you.
Throw out, sorry, Jen.
No, please.
Throw out one more alternative I've heard of.
Please.
Okay, and this, I can't remember her name. There's an instructor who at least was a member of North American Geoscience Teachers, and she's in the Pacific Northwest, and she's presented about this project, kind of a term project or late in the quarter project. Now, it's not going to meet the outcomes of learning how to identify using properties and this and that and give them a lab test, but it really gets them to identify with and sort of humanize a rock or mineral. I think it's rock, well, it could be either, but she has each student present a rock or mineral in terms of not only what it is, but what its human history is and what its uses have been, and you know how it shows up in stories and legends and museums or whatever. However they take it, they can be very creative, and she finds the students get passionate about it. They identify with the mineral. They really pitch it. So if you're looking for a more felt alternative instead of identify the luster and cleavage kind of thing, or maybe both, you know, you could add that kind of approach as well, where they do a PowerPoint. It doesn't have to be very long on it.
Ralph, that sounds awesome. So could you remember how to access that?
How to get the instructor?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I can dig her up. It'll take me a little bit to look through my old meeting notes and so on, but I'll give it a try. Yeah, I don't think it'll happen right here, but I might just end up sending you an email that you can forward
that would be great. That would be awesome. And thank you for that, by the way. And I love the way you articulated that about it could be a more felt way. I think for a lot of students right now, the felt way might be very, very lovely for a lot of them. So thank you.
Sure.
One thing before we move into data, I know Tom Brazunas, you are using a kit. Do you have capacity to share with us a little bit about how you're using a kit?
Well, I was going to ask if anyone had a suggestion for a relatively inexpensive rock and mineral kit. What I'm using, what I have used for environmental geology online before is a fairly expensive kit from eScience Labs. And there are many kits out there that you could choose from. And it is a pretty standard approach, not as creative or as individualized as many of the other ideas here. It's just using a set of minerals and rocks, and then there's just an incredible number of YouTube videos that you can choose from, a series of them for helping students understand how to identify rocks and minerals from different approaches. But of course it's not, but of course there's an expense involved in using a rock and mineral kit. So the kit I'm using is fairly expensive, has been fairly expensive, over $100. I just wondered if there are other suggestions out there for if you're going to go the kit route. Thanks.
Thank you. Is anyone using kits?
I did. I purchased some kits from a homeschool link. They are not amazing, but they work, and it gives them at least something to touch and feel. They were about $13 for the mineral kit and $15 for the rock kit. I purchased them with our lab fees, and then the bookstore distributed them for me in the same way that they were distributing textbooks by bringing them out to vehicles. So the only thing they didn't have in them was they had just a cheap little plastic eyepiece that was kind of crappy, but so they didn't have mineral testing kits, but I just basically told them to find something like a glass recyclable that they could use and grab a penny and a magnet from the refrigerator. And I just basically told them how to build their own little kit as well to help with that. So I can put the link up on here if you are interested.
Thank you. And also people are posting links to kits. And one thing I did want to say to this group is that I think we should probably be prepared to be teaching remotely for longer than we would like to. So for the, so I think it's worth the energy of this group to be thinking about low cost, low tech, accessible, if you are going to use a kit, like this group maybe working together to think of what kits might look like. One thing I did want to say yesterday in the physics conversation is that they were talking about things that students could do at home with stuff they already have at home with their kids. So for example, and Lucas or Anthony, you might be able to paraphrase this better, but looking at light in a glass of water, for example. And so Anthony, you just unmuted yourself. So can you speak to this maybe?
So I wasn't the one who was talking about the light in the glass of water experiment, but yeah, somebody mentioned that a really good one to do is take a look at a pencil or any other solid object in water and look at the amount of refraction. And you can actually do a lab where you would figure out the index of refraction from water.
Yeah, people were just getting really excited about just things you could do to teach to your learning outcomes that students could do at home, and especially bonus points if you can do it with kids. So I just wanted to kind of throw that out there.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead. What were you going to say?
For astronomy, actually, I was still in the process of writing them up, but I was going to give them a couple labs that they were going to be able to do themselves at home, where they just observe the night sky over the next month and a half and follow the position of a planet. And I was going to have them, pick a planet and see how it moves over the course of a month with respect to the background stars. And I just taught them how to measure angles in the night sky. And Venus is especially bright in the western sky right now, right after sunset. So it is an absolutely perfect target for them to look at and observe. And if they wanted to get up like really early in the morning, they could also do Mars or Jupiter as well. And then also one where they just go out one night and over a course of a few hours look toward the north in the sky and see how the stars seem to circle around the pole star. And then I was thinking of doing one where they look at the angle along the horizon of the sunrise over the course of a month and a half, but I may have missed my window a bit on that because I would have liked to have started a little closer to the equinox so they could see it really rapidly changing, and then as we approach the solstice, it slows down. But I might still do something along those lines, but it might be an activity of a slightly different make. But,
Anthony, that sounds awesome. Thank you. Especially students tracking Venus. Like that sounds really awesome. Thank you. Katja, could you talk a little bit about your density idea for your ocean class?
So this needs to be created by next week.
Boom, done.
It's not done yet, but in the past, I've had my students, sort of do a density lab where they're measuring density, and then, they like cut something in half and check it, blah, blah, blah. But I've also tried to do it sort of in the context of buoyancy, where I have like a candy bar that's frozen versus not frozen, and they like drop it in the water to see if they respond differently frozen or not frozen, because I want to kind of get them to step away from just their own experience of ice as being the only thing that, sort of is different. So, but anyway, and so I was thinking about sort of doing something where they like take a carrot, stick one in the freezer, and throw the carrot in water and see if it responds differently in water, if it's frozen versus not frozen, just to kind of get a sense of how density, is sort of how it changes as a function of temperature, how it changes. Then of course they can add salt water and then sort of test some stuff with salt water. I think there's some things that they can do at home that I have them do in my lab that they could potentially either videotape or describe what they've done, but it's something that I'm hoping that they could potentially like get a photo of their kid in the shot of the carrot falling to the bottom of the water. It's sort of, they're like, maybe I can find a clip from the David Letterman Will It Float and make it a content. I don't know. Anyway, so I mean, these are all things that are floating around my mind that probably will be some crappy version of it because I have to have it done by next week.
Yes, and I guess I would just say to all of you, done is better than perfect. And if folks can kind of rapid prototype, flesh it out, and then we know for future quarters, because again, like especially if we are in COVID-19 situations for longer, being able to share more refined artifacts will be really important. Katja, thank you for sharing that. One thing that we haven't talked about yet, and I know I'm conscious of the time, it's 1:15, is how people are teaching to students data skills. And I know there's some stuff in the chat about this, and so I'm wondering if anyone could talk about how are you going to be teaching data literacy and students working with data in this environment.
Can I mention one thing?
Yeah, please.
I don't think, maybe this hasn't been brought up because this class was supposed to meet in person, which is I may be just showing them how to make a calculation in an Excel spreadsheet instead of doing it together in a room through Zoom, through the Zoom meeting, video conferencing that.
Nice.
So I haven't tried it yet, but I'm a little bit nervous about it. I wanted to do them to do some calculations in astronomy that involve exponents and so on. And I find it easiest in Excel, but there's a learning curve. Most students don't know spreadsheets. So I'm just trying to figure it out is all I'm saying. But I'm trying to figure out if I can present that through Zoom, like we're doing here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you can do screen share.
Yeah. And talk about learning by failing. My first Zoom class yesterday, I couldn't get my screen share to work, but I think I figured it out since then. So, but anyway.
Katja's also suggesting Screencast-O-Matic.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, and Lucas is suggesting maybe Excel tutorials. I think you know, at the state board, you know, given that so many students don't have access to high quality internet and like a bunch of other different things, we're trying to encourage people to avoid, you know, again, like obviously if you want to have synchronous meetings with your class, absolutely. But I think for a lot of students that will just not be feasible. And so doing something on Canvas, like recording yourself, like Katja is mentioning with
Well, that's like
Screencast-O-Matic.
what I'm doing is I'm turning these around into recordings that have another opportunity to just watch the video and do the same things that you see that this, you know, we're doing during the session to try and, you know, and it gets loaded into Canvas. So I'm hoping that makes up for that lack of access for some students or lack of being able to get access because they're busy with other things. But we'll see.
No, that sounds great. That sounds great. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So Lucas, I know you've worked with with big data in biology. Do you have anything to suggest to the group?
Not in terms of specific resources necessarily. I know Nanus was mentioned earlier, but that won't apply necessarily to every geoscience class. But Nanus is a great place to start in terms of looking at real data. I would say just getting students to look at data and get to the questioning phase is often hard enough at this level because they haven't been asked to grapple with data in that way a lot of times, especially live data. So I think, especially in this situation, even if you can't get to the calculations of things, if you can get them to look at data and actually grapple with questions around what that data might mean, you know, what that tells us, how we can use it to answer, you know, bigger questions. You know, with Nanus, it's sensors in the Puget Sound and the coastline and Columbia River. You know, what does the pH and the turbidity and those things in the water mean to us? What does it have to do with things we're doing? Like a big one is shellfish farming. That's a common one that can be used. So I think if you can just get students to, and that would be a good low-tech way of having them play with data is what are questions, you know, what are problems that we can use this to answer? What does that mean? I think having them work through data that way is a really effective tool for getting them to meet learning outcomes, but that may not apply to every course, but I think it's something to think about. And then you can build on that as you continue to work on your online course. You know, as Jen said, we may be doing this for a long time. And I'll be honest, if you've never taught this class online and now you're doing it, there's a good chance you're going to be having a conversation with your dean or your VP at some point in the near future after we get back to somewhat normal schedule. And they're going to say, hey, we offered this online before. What is a way we can do it continually? Like, let's think about that from an admin point of view. That's going to be a conversation because it comes down to FTEs and students. And so there's a possibility you're going to continue to teach this class. So I think starting in that simple way and then building it will allow you to get to the point where you have good structure and scaffolding to where you can do calculations and do some more sophisticated things with data. But start in the most simplest form you can with that big data with students, because it can be really overwhelming to a student to be like, oh, I got to take this data and then do a calculation. It just gets overwhelming for them. So I think if you can just start to get them to grapple with what does this data mean? Why is it important? How can we use it is a great beginning.
Lucas, thank you so much. And Artie, I see Artie Kavenin, and I'm so sorry that I'm probably massacring the last name right now. Could you speak, or Christina Sorensen talking about earthquake?
Well, I didn't share the earthquake, but I shared some real data that's local, real time, based in Everett. And just to kind of circle back a little bit at what Jason was talking about is, I think it's important for us to think holistically about the student. So in your courses, how are you embedding that connection to each other? Like, I know, Katya, I saw your note about how do we do it without typing all the time, and I certainly haven't managed it at all. But one of the things that I've adapted, and all of our students, or many of our students, are probably too young, but I do Tuesday or Thursdays with Artie. Like, do you guys remember Tuesdays with Maury? And so it's just an open Zoom Q&A. It doesn't have to be question driven, but just trying to support them a little more holistically about yes, here we are trying to navigate content. Here we are trying, but what's important to you right now? How are you managing? How can we support you is one of the things that I was doing. So, and if the link that I shared about live data, we're shockingly having some glitches right now, but on the transmission, when it shows virtually, if you can't, you can see the individual parameter every half an hour, and it's supposed to give you a weekly graph, but I can easily give you the link to download the data where you can have that graph as well. So I'm not sure, Jen, if that's what you were asking, but
that's what I was asking. And also look at what a mind reader you are, because I look at this. How are you supporting and engaging students in this online environment? And so thank you for modeling being reflected to students, and knowing too that like your course is important, but there might be other things. And I love your check-in with Tuesdays with Artie. Is that what you said?
Well, I made it Thursdays,
Thursdays.
Thursdays with Artie.
So did Katja. No, I think that's beautiful. So one thing I know that it's 1:23, and I feel like we've sort of barely scratched the surface. And so here's my proposal to this group. So we've been doing this with other groups, and chemistry is basically meeting every week. Biology majors have asked if we could have, weekly meetings. Physics, I think, is going to have a weekly meeting. I'm wondering, is it useful to continue to meet and just kind of share challenges and share strategies? Is that something that people would like, or maybe every other week? The other thing I did want to ask is, Lucas and I are happy to build a Canvas shell, and I actually think, Lucas, we might have enough from this discussion to organize the Canvas shell. So, like field trips, using data, but I'm just wondering, in terms of the organization of the Canvas shell, do folks have thoughts or suggestions? What would make a Canvas shell of resources useful to you?
Could I pick the low-hanging fruit?
Please.
Just all these links and these URLs that have been going, and documents and so on that have been going into the chat, if they could be somehow harvested from there, that would make a great set of resources to start with in a Canvas shell.
I love that. We can totally do that. Lucas said, I have been harvesting them. Great verb too. And Katie is saying sections on labs, written work, a few discussion boards on particular topics. And Katie, welcome, by the way, hello. And Katie, what kind of discussion boards would you like to see, just out of curiosity? And feel free to take the mic if you would like to. While we're waiting, Katie said common problems. What are other people doing for particular student issues? Okay, Katie, thank you. That's very helpful. One thing I would like to ask is, what are if we did include, organization by courses? Lucas has a suggestion. Lucas, why don't you share this with the group, and then folks can give feedback?
Yeah, well, we could do it by courses as well. I was just throwing out, I've been taking notes, as I do with all of these, Jen, on what I'm hearing and starting to organize the resources. But what I had so far was that, there's a need around kind of interactive rock and mineral ID activities, at-home activities that maybe could be done with family, kids, but just any sort of at-home assignment or activity, working with bigger data, and then virtual field trips, virtual field assignments. Those were some of the main areas that looked like we were needing help or had resources. I think it's always good to have both those so that people can start sharing and we can gain momentum in that way. But if we wanted to look at it as courses as well, we could always put those things under each course, like we did. We've done so many of these now, I can't remember which area, but we've done that for a couple of them where we put different, I know majors biology, we did it by course, and then we put different subtopics under each course in Canvas so that people could go under Biology 221, and then go under virtual simulation and find what they needed. So really what works for all of you is what we want, so that you can easily access and find an organized set of resources that you can just go right to, and make it easy for you to harvest those things.
That would be great. And Katie just added something on data and visualizations in oceanography in particular. And Lucas, I feel like with we talked about this yesterday with the Institute for Systems Biology. Katie, I think we might have some resources for you. So that's good to know. Yeah, so I think maybe in our last 3 minutes, if folks could write in your email if you would like to continue to work together. And so I can add you to a Canvas shell, and then Lucas will set up an organization for the Canvas shell, and we will go through, and just continue. I think the other thing I would like to know is, would this group like to meet next week at this time? And if folks would like a different day or time, or a meeting in 2 weeks rather than 1 week, that would also be helpful for me and Lucas to know. All right. So, okay, so I think I'm seeing maybe every 2 weeks, and so again, we can sort of read through the chat and figure this out, but I think it's good to just know like what people are thinking. All right. Anything else that before we go, is there anything else that people would like to voice just before we leave, while we've still got all these brilliant minds and hearts in the room? Anything else that you'd like to share or that you're thinking about?
Yeah, I just posted up my link to my 3-hour minerals talks on YouTube on the chat there. So anyone that wants to check that out and use it is welcome to do that.
Thank you. Thank you thank you for doing that. I really appreciate it. And I am grateful to all of you because I know your time is valuable, and thank you so much for all of the hard work you are doing for your students right now. I really, really appreciate that. Thank you.
Hey, Jen, for those who are still on here, if you could post, oh, perfect. Yeah, Artie's already doing it. If you could just post which courses you're teaching, that would be great. And then I can look at if we want to organize by course, or at least have something around that in the Canvas shell. But that'd be helpful if you could post which courses you're teaching.
Yeah, this would be very helpful. Yeah, and thanks to all of you who are writing thanks in the chat. And I do want to say thanks to Lucas and Alyssa, and our entire e-learning team. These have been very exciting, and it's so fun to get to work with faculty like this. And so thank you for being willing to come and talk about this with us today. All right, so I am now going to stop the recording.